So what does the AFL do next? As they've said, they'll assess tomorrow. I've got no doubt that all of that's happening at the moment. So let me just run you through a calendar as it stands, Nick. So the 32-day period ends on Friday, the 7th of August. So a couple of clubs will miss that plane on Saturday and Sunday, and then the Victorian teams would return. So the big question is what happens in the aftermath of that, given that the lockdown doesn't end until the 20th of August. So I just went back and had a listen to, we spoke with Travis Old on Crunch Time on Saturday. So there are three takeouts for me. So he said there was a firm commitment to 32 days and it'll be 33 or 34 in the cases of the teams that play Saturdays and Sundays in that weekend. He said that initially they would play these 5 rounds across 5 weekends, but there was the capacity to condense the rounds if needed. I would put to you now that it is probably needed. And there's an inherent agreement that is already in place to play off 4-day breaks. The clubs have already agreed that that can and would be possible. So I would suggest to you there is a possibility. So this is only my thinking. I don't want this to be portrayed as this is what the AFL is doing. After the 14-day quarantine period that most teams need to observe if you're in Queensland or then heading to Western Australia, there is the capacity to play 4 rounds in 3 weeks. This was always said to us that they could crunch rounds into weeks. So you could come back on that weekend of 14, 15, 16, 1 round ahead. We could have already played 11 instead of 10, which gives you the breathing space of that weekend, which allows you to reset either in Victoria or elsewhere.
Because they're coming back after 32 days.
Yeah. So they'll be back after what was the 10th game, round 10, which I don't think they'll be rounds anymore by the time, which is the 8th and the 9th.
Could that change after today's announcement?
So they felt they had given the players a firm commitment that they would bring them back. So I'll hold them to their word on that they'll bring them back. And there's actually no need to keep them there the extra weekend. You can put the extra games in. They have said to us all along, we shorten the quarters and we shorten the number to be able to condense the season. I just think there's a clear case to play 4 rounds in 3 weeks and come back 1 ahead, which gives you the breathing space of that questionable weekend.
You wonder whether, knowing what we know now, if the AFL does indeed pull that trigger and try to get that extra week's worth of game in and buy yourself, because it's about time, isn't it? That you're trying to buy time. That whether clubs, if we're going to 4-day breaks, would they have taken their extended squads? Because that will put a strain on the football program and the players that we haven't seen consistently back to back.
Yeah, so I know that sounds bad, but 4 games in 3 weeks, if you map it out, would actually be quite manageable.
Yeah.
There would be 2 short turnarounds, I suspect, in there. And I think the least number of players the team has taken is 32.
Well, which you can make do with. You can make do with 32. Oh, just as a contingency. I mean, again, the ship sailed. It's a moot point now. So if we get back to Victoria and we've got 32 days back to Victoria, so assuming the players stay for what, a weekend?
Yep.
Would you then envisage them going back interstate, into hubs?
So if stage 3 restrictions were still in place beyond that 6 weeks, I don't think you could play football here, just having lived through what we lived through. So it would be out again. There would be one alternative to that, which again I'd float, and this is probably the worst case scenario, is there would be 7 games left to play, and maybe 6 on what I've depicted there, is there are 8 non-Victorian teams who could play amongst themselves to make up the last 6 or 7 games, while Victorian teams could play amongst themselves for the last 6 or 7 teams. So what you would lose is everyone playing everyone once, but you would get everyone's 17 games in circumstances which had simply closed in. So there's a few ways to do it. Which ways are satisfactory? But I do think as a starting point, playing that extra game and getting in front on the timeline that you've laid out and established with clubs right from the start is we will condense the season when the time comes. I actually think the time's come.